Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Phil Mackintosh, chief economist at Nasdaq, for an update on the latest COVID-19 news, the U.S. and global economies, and how markets are digesting the progress of reopening the economies. And Phil, it seems to be that with our handling of COVID-19, politics, isolation, trade tensions, it's starting to hit the dollar.
That's true. The US dollar really strengthened right in the middle of the crisis. Just natural flight to quality, sort of security and safety, which always happens when you have a lot of volatility. But since the markets have all been getting back to normal, we've seen a weakening of the dollar, and in the last week or so, we've seen it back down to sort of longer term lows. It's interesting because when you look at some of the longer term positioning of traders as well, they're getting quite bearish on the US dollar as well. It's probably pricing in things like the fact that we're looking to have lower rates for longer, but also probably not helped by the fact that we look like we're going to have coronavirus for longer as well.
Well, one thing we are winning is we're top of the leaderboard for world's worst outbreaks.
Yeah, I mean, we're well ahead of number two. But actually what's more interesting, I think, is just looking at who is our company right now, because most of the Western world has had coronavirus, has tackled it, and is now back under control. This sort of second wave of outbreaks, or I guess extension really, it's not a second wave in the US, but the extension of outbreaks to the South and Western states. You can see when you compare us to some of the other countries that are having similar amounts of cases per million residents, some of the US states are right up there with what would be classified emerging markets and relatively poor, uneducated countries. I mean, it's a little disappointing to see so many American states performing in line with these kinds of countries. We're also looking at testing. I mean, we're doing a lot more testing now, which was one of the things that we talk about. Taiwan was very successful at stopping people coming into their country by testing on arrival. We're doing more testing now, but it really still looks like we're testing people who are feeling a bit sick and turning up at test sites. And you can see that in the daily positive numbers. They've gone up almost double since June. So people are still getting sick, going and getting testing more than they are trying to stop people coming into the country, stop people who are potential super spreaders from just still participating in rallies or other sorts of public activities where they become sort of the central point for a new spread.
We're also seeing a slowdown with employment. That's not where we want to see a decline.
No. I mean, the unemployment numbers, or the employment numbers, have been really positive. That's what we've been talking about. One of the reasons why the market's been quite strong is the recovery has been pretty good in the States. Getting people back to work, getting people back out to restaurants has been important. But when you see this increase in cases in all the states in the South, you've seen them start to shut down some restaurants and go back to more isolation for civilians. You're also seeing a reduction in people booking restaurants. You can see in the data, even going out to malls, going out to auto dealers has already turned down, just because people are now more worried about the risk of being around other people. And so that's going to filter through into the economy, and it's going to then affect employment going forward. So a lot of economists are now saying that although we had a pretty good recovery off the sort of April, May lows, we might be going to have a little bit more of a challenge to get back to normal completely, because a lot of the activities that are still not at full employment are higher risk activities like air travel, like staying in hotels, but also when we have a downturn caused by the increase in cases, it's only going to make it worse.
Yeah, and we're also seeing a reversal in process too with some economic data.
Yeah, so the Fed Weekly Economic Index is basically a combo index of all of the different data that's out there in terms of production and economic activity, and it has started to tick back down. So it's kind of a sign that the people that said we might have a zigzag swoosh might actually be right, where we have a really dramatic shutdown and isolation initially, and then we open things back up, we make some mistakes, we go backwards a little bit. And then we open things back up, we make a few mistakes and go backwards a little bit. And that, at the moment, the data is actually starting to support that theory being true.
All right, well, let's try and end on a positive note, or at least a fun note, with a new way of trying to test or trace where cases are popping up.
Yeah, so it's not really a new way of testing, but it's a dirty way of testing. So I remember we talked about the fact that in New Haven, coronavirus was detected in pretty large quantities in the poo, in the sewage. of the Connecticut residents weeks before it became a problem in hospitals and testing. And so what's actually happened is people have been looking for, where did coronavirus come from? Did it originate in China, or did it come from some other place in the world? And there's a few studies going around that show that it's actually been detected in sewage in Brazil, in Spain, well before it was detected in China. So interesting research. That sort of speaks to the fact that maybe we should be looking in our poo more for coronavirus, because that definitely seems to be where it turns up before it gets to be a problem in society. But it also might mean that coronavirus, the theory from a lot of the scientists is maybe it's actually been latent around the world, and something has just triggered it to wake up, like a lot of other viruses that affect the world.
Okay, well, I'll let the scientists far smarter than I am tackle that issue. Phil, thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
You're welcome, Jill.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.